welcome to the Battle of Midway by historicalboardgaming.com. I'm Mike Kelley, the game's designer. I'm going to take you through some of the basics today of how to play a turn, what the map looks like, what the other components look like. I've done a separate video for setup help, so be sure you check that out on your first playthrough. After that, it should be no problem. Let's get started. Okay, here's a close look at the map. We're going to start off by taking a peek at Midway itself. You see that there's a couple of markers printed on the map there for the seaplane base and the airfield on the island. I'm going to zoom out here just a bit so you get a sense of what the whole map looks like. Number of sea zones, of course. We've got some nice artwork in there. A couple of the sea zones are labeled for particular game items. On each side of the map, you're going to see we have a victory point track. It's got some nice graphics in there. Also at the top, tells you which side, of course, the tracker is for. There's an area to put your reinforcements or hidden task forces for the American player. Coming over here to the other side, there's a Kagi. This will be the Japanese side. It's flipped to the other direction for the player to sit on the other side of the map. It's got your victory points in Japanese. And the rising suns show you where the starting locations are. There's some other detail in the map art. Doug and I had a lot of fun finding all of this old historical photographs and charts. So I hope you enjoy it. Taking a quick look at the carrier cards. Here's the US card. You use these to track the status of your carrier and the status of your aircraft. Also for the US player, you've got Midway Island there. Battle boards, they've got some summary information here so you don't forget. These battle boards are going to be used to resolve combat. A little more dynamic than your usual Axis and Allies type game. We're going to be looking at the order of play. We're going to go through a turn just to show everyone how a turn works. This is a summary card that comes with the game components, so you can easily track the order of play. And also, just to show you, I've got a reference card here. This particular one is for the American units. You can see each of the aircraft types on the front, some carriers, and if you flip it over, there's the rest of the units. These are real nice quality cardstock. Doug did a great job on these. On the other side of the order of play is your setup information. So you'll use that once at the beginning of the game, and then you can flip it over to have your order of play reference, and also combat modifiers to keep those handy. Let's start moving through the order of play. Okay, getting started with the order of play. We're going to run through the first phase. The very first thing we do on a game turn is check for victory. Obviously, you can probably skip this on the first turn and maybe a few turns after, but you do have to keep an eye on the victory conditions. I'd like to point out here that there are 3 scenarios for the game that have various victory conditions depending on how long you want to play. The first 2 are noted here on the very first page of the rule book. Victory points and how to win. Essentially, you can play at either 10 points or 12 points depending on how long you want to play. I always recommend the 12-point game. It's sort of the full-length version of the game and gives you the most enjoyment. Alternatively, on the very back page of the rules, here you will see optional victory by losses. So instead of counting victory points, it has more to do with matching or beating the historical outcome of the battle. So you just count carrier losses. So that's 2 options on how to play the game, and the first option has 2 different point values, so that's a total of 3 options on how to play. The next step in our turn is going to be to determine command tokens for that turn. You'll note down here in this box, I give you sort of a quick reference because on the first turn of the game, it works a little differently than on the remaining turns. So on the first turn, we're only going to put a few in the cup at first. In this game, these tokens are used for activating units, so it works a little bit more like a traditional war game than it does an Axis and Allies style game. You're not allowed to move everything you want necessarily. So the first thing we're going to do is place 2 Japanese markers in the cup and 2 American markers in the cup, and then you'll note there it says once those are used up, then we will place the rest in there. I think it explains that over here. So here's my markers. I'm going to take 2 of these, into the cup they go, and 2 of these into the cup they go. That's my cool little custom Midway cup there. I think only I get one of those. 1.3 is the next thing we need to do. We're going to determine the reinforcements for the turn. You see that Japan determines theirs first, and then the US player determines theirs second. For the Japanese, the rule is you have to have C-Zone 37 clear. It goes into more explanation here. But on the first turn, since you haven't moved yet, and the setup indicates that you will start with units in C-Zone 37, the Japanese player is not eligible for reinforcements on the first turn. For the US player, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the reference card for the setup, and it says if the US player wishes, they can bring in a unit. Well, you're going to want to do that because that's the only way to get your bombers onto the map. So here's our American setup card. You'll notice on the task forces here it says turn 1 plus, turn 2 plus, and then turn 3. The reason it says that is by turn 3 you have to have all 3 carrier groups on the map. It's your choice if you want to bring in 1 per turn, or if you want to bring in, say, 2 on the second turn or all 3 on the third turn. But as you bring them in, it uses up those activation markers, so you may want to spread that around. I'll try to go into some concepts of strategy later at some point, but for now I just want to get through the mechanics of playing a turn. So in our example here, the US player is going to choose to bring on the Enterprise Task Force. So in order to do that, they just take those units, they're going to move them onto the map in any of these spaces shown with the US rondelles. I'm going to put these guys in point luck. Now in order to do that, it's going to cost me one of these activation markers, which means I won't be able to use it later on in the turn. So I'm going to take that out of the cup. Next item in our phase is to set the carrier op status. What we're going to be doing here is deciding what our carriers are going to do for the upcoming game turn. Now, if we take a look at the rules here real quick, there's some rules here on how to set your status and what it means. Most importantly here is if you have a carrier that has come in as a reinforcement this turn, which the Americans just did, then it has to choose maneuver because it is under Steam moving onto the map board. So the way we choose maneuver is we go over to our carrier card, and in that op status box we're just going to leave it blank, meaning that the carrier is able to maneuver. It will not be launching or landing aircraft this turn. For the Japanese, they start the game with their 4 primary Kitobutai carriers in op status of launch. And the reason for that is they have launched this massive air group that is moving towards Midway Island to do its bomb run as historically accurate. But on this first turn, we can decide if we want to do something different. So just to mix it up, I'm going to leave the first carrier division under their launch status. Maybe we can get some of those attack bombers out. And the second division, I'm going to change these to maneuver status so that maybe we can move them. I've noticed here on the board that there's an American patrol plane taking a look at those carriers, and I think I'd like to just stay hidden for a little bit longer. Next thing we need to do is to spot any aircraft on the decks from the hangars if we're under launch orders. So we did decide we were going to leave 2 of our Japanese carriers under launch order. That would be the Akagi and the Kaga. And they've got a number of aircraft that you see start down in the hangar, and we want to move those to the top deck so that we can launch them this turn. Fleet carriers this size can spot up to 5 units on the deck per turn. And so what that will mean is we've got 3 attack bombers, 2 fighters from Akagi, so we just slide those up. And on Kaga, we've got 2 fighters, and we actually have 4 bombers left here, so we're going to move 3 of those up. Just be sure whenever you split a group like that, that you be sure to add the applicable units back in here to show that you've now got 1 left in the hangar and the remaining ones are on deck. So that's all you have to do to spot aircraft. Alright, last part of the first phase is to recover aircraft. In this particular case, we're not going to be recovering any aircraft this turn, but I do want to show you how that works. So essentially, if, say, the Kaga here was not under launch orders, but it was under landing orders or recover orders, and it had no aircraft in the way on its deck, you would say take an air unit that's in the same space as the Kaga, for example, this fighter. Now, it's okay that he only has 1 fuel left. He can use that for this turn, and when he's out of fuel next turn, then he's going to be wanting to land. For this turn, though, you would simply just remove the fuel, take that off the board. You would take the fighters, and you'd put them back over here in their fighter slot. And of course, these guys would be down in the hangar still, so they're not in the way. And that's how you would land fighters. In the second phase, this is all about moving and searching with the patrol aircraft. Patrol aircraft can move and search without using any of the command tokens. This is free, so you can activate all of them and use them if you want. The first thing we're going to do is make all movement for both sides, and then we're going to roll off the search mission results. I'll go through that now. So for movement, again, it's free, so you may as well take advantage. The Japanese player has a couple of patrol aircraft that they can decide where they want to go. Taking a look here at our quick reference chart, we see that patrol aircraft have a movement point of 2. So we're just going to take the first one, and he's going to decide to move 1, 2 over this way. Now, patrol aircraft don't fight, so you don't have to worry about moving in the same space as the US player there. And let's see, this unit here is going to move 1, 2 over this way. Now, you'll notice in this first turn, because of where the Americans placed their carrier group, neither of those patrol aircraft can get close enough to roll against that unit. So the Japanese player is not going to have any search mission results on the first turn here. But that's only because of where the American player decided to place their task force. Alright, for the US player, we've got a unit here. 1, 2. I've got 1 down here on Midway. So I'm going to pick him up, take him from Midway, and move out 2. 1, 2. To here. We'll see if we can find some more carriers to sink. Now, there's also a patrol aircraft here, and I'm going to leave them there because I want to try to find those carriers. So let's see how that works. Alright, so now we need to resolve this search. So we've got 1 search plane, and it is trying to locate the enemy aircraft carrier group. You can see here that the status is hidden, so they've not been located yet. According to the rules, that means that the search plane gets to roll 2 dice, and the carrier group is going to roll 1 die. And what we're looking to try to do here is beat the result. In the rule book, I've got this example already set up. So you can see here that the patrol aircraft is going to roll 2d12. They're going to get a 1 and a 9. And the carrier group rolls a 3. So that 9 easily beats the 3. So this group has now been spotted. So the way we do that is we remove the hidden marker from the task force marker, and we place our patrol plane right on top of there. Now this allows the patrol plane to shadow the group so that he can keep contact with it, relaying that information back to the carriers so that they can launch their bombers to attack. third phase of the game is executing orders. Now this is where we are going to use the command tokens that we put in our cup earlier to activate various units on the map. Things that will be happening here as we draw the tokens are we're going to be launching or moving aircraft in the game, combat aircraft. We've already used the patrol aircraft. We would be able to maneuver task forces, that's surface units that are on the map if we want to move them to adjacent sea zones in the map. We would play the weather token if we draw that one, and I'll go over that a little later. We haven't put that in the cup yet. And also we would play the combat token. Also, I'll go over that later. We haven't put that in the cup yet. Right now we only have 3 tokens in the cup. That's 2 Japanese tokens and 1 American token. You remember that we had to use one of the American tokens in order to bring their task force onto the board over here. So the first thing we're going to do then on this turn is we're going to draw one of these markers out of here. And I've got a Japanese marker. So what I'd like to use that for is I'm going to show you how the air units move here. So here's our attack force moving towards Midway Island. There's some terminology important to this part in the game. You'll find that on page 2 and 3 of the rule book. The terminology I want to direct you to is strike group. The reason for that is one activation marker or command token, if you will, allows a strike group to move. So in here, we actually have 2 strike groups as per the definition in the rules. The first one is going to be the aircraft from Kaga and Akagi. That includes both the fighters and the bombers. And the reason for that is they all come from this same base marker, this carrier division. So the second strike group is going to be the ones from Hiryu and Soryu. So you just want to make sure that when you're playing a marker, that you play the marker and move the appropriate units. So in this case, they can move 3. They are a little faster than patrol aircraft. So they're going to move 1, 2, and 3 right onto Midway Island. So I'm going to put their activation marker here and slide the appropriate units over here with it. So now we have those, and of course don't forget their fuel marker. And so that is how you spend a command token to move the aircraft. Moving ships would be similar. You would just move the ships to an adjacent sea zone and then place the marker with it. So if instead of moving the aircraft that we moved on the map, you wanted to launch some aircraft from the carriers by spending that command token, you can move an entire strike group or launch an entire strike group for the cost of 1 command token. So again, a strike group is defined as the aircraft all from 1 carrier division. So we can actually, for 1 token, launch all of the aircraft that we have ready on Akagi and Kaga. And the way that we would do that is they can move 3. So we would start from the carrier and they can move out 3. 1, 2, 3. How about we put them here in Sea Zone 15? So we'll go and grab these. One and 2. And we'll grab the ones from Kaga. Now again, we're not actually going to do this because we've already spent our points. But it's just an alternative as to what you could do with that instead. So there's our units. You can stack them up to save some space as they are all in 1 strike group. Let's grab the wrong marker there. We have a fuel 3 marker showing that they're all fresh on fuel, so we're going to leave that with the group. And instead of placing the marker there, you would place it with this group showing that they've activated for their turn, they've already moved and used that marker, which we'll pick up later at the end of the turn, and it will go back into the cup next turn. Let's go over how to use these other markers that we haven't talked about yet. So I went ahead and played a couple more markers on the map. just getting the rest of the Japanese aircraft in there. But I want to show you how these other ones work. So once you expend all 4 markers that we initially put in the map, and again, that's a first turn only rule, then you're going to put the rest of the markers in the cup and start drawing them out. And eventually, you're probably going to draw the weather marker. So this is a squall marker, and what that means is there's a storm that starts to come onto the game board here up in the north. And the first squall marker, which are the small square ones to denote the storm coming in, gets placed in C-Zone 3. And that's going to cause some problems for search operations, aircraft moving through, that sort of thing. After you place the first one, on subsequent turns, whoever is drawing the marker, the other player gets to decide along the top row where they want to put the next one. So it comes in consecutively, so you'll start here in the middle of the top, and let's say, for example, the Japanese player draws the squall token again, then you would place the next marker either here or here, and that would be the US player that gets to choose, and so on and so forth. Once the whole top row is filled, then the second row starts to get filled, and that's the extent of the weather in the game. And it'll depend on how many times you draw it throughout the game as to how far that squall comes in, but it's a nice place to hide, it's a nice thing to mess with the enemy, that sort of a thing. Alright, the last one we're going to talk about here is this one. This is the battle marker. So when this is drawn, that lets you know that the movement portion is over, that phase 3 is over, and we're going to move into phase 4, which is conducting any combat. Now the fun part of this is you never know exactly when it's going to get drawn, so you never know how many of those command markers you're going to get to use before it's time to resolve combat. But once this is drawn, movement ends, and the next phase begins. So let's cover that. So because we drew the battle token, we're going to start the 4th phase, conducting combat. So the first thing that would happen is the Japanese player would invade islands. That has to do with the transport units that are some special rules. I'm not going to go over that at the moment, but essentially if you can get the Japanese transports to Midway, you can score some bonus points that way. So right into 4.2, Performing Cap Intercepts. This would happen mostly by the US player, but the Japanese player can do that as well. And there are certain circumstances where if you have aircraft on combat air patrol, they can move into adjacent areas to try to help intercept incoming enemy bombers. Again, those are somewhat special circumstances beyond just the basics of a turn, so I will let you explore that on your own. 4.3 is resolve attacks. We're going to alternate. Japan gets to choose the first one. In this particular case, though, we only have the one attack on Midway, so we're going to go through how to resolve that. And then afterward, we would score any victory points that comes out of the battles. So I've got our combat board set up here, our battle board. For Midway, we're only going to use the American side. There's no Japanese side over here to worry about, as all of the attackers are aircraft, so there's no surface ships, and so we're only going to use the American side of the board. And what I've done here is I've moved all of the attacking aircraft from the map to the battle board up into this blue area, and then there were 2 defending American cap fighters that I've split across here. They get to choose where they want to set up in the outer ring that's marked cap. You can see that destroyers and cap go in the outer ring. And then cruisers and escort fighters go in this middle ring. Escort fighters are fighters that are escorting bombers in case there's an air-to-air battle. And then in the center you have your capital ships, air base, anti-aircraft guns, which is what I've put here, and so on and so forth, transports, that kind of thing. So not a bad idea at this time to take the markers from Midway Island showing the air base and the seaplane base. And I just put those out to remind me that they're there. And also you can put damage tokens on them if they take damage. So it's just a good indicator of what to do. So in the combat instructions, the first thing that you need to do to begin the attack, which is, or the attacker's enter, I should say, is round 0. So what you're going to do is you're going to, as the attacker, put out all of your different air groups. Now, an air group is defined as similar aircraft from the same carrier. So you can see I've split up each carrier's units. So we've got Akagi's units, Kaga's units, Hiryu's units, and Soryu's units. And then you're going to pair up fighter aircraft with the bombers to defend them as they come in past the defending fighters, AA guns, that sort of a thing. You don't have to split them up the way that I've done it, keeping the units from each carrier with its associated bombers, but I chose to just split them all up the same. So I've got 3 bombers and 2 fighters in each one of these groups. You'll note in this particular case that the Japanese Kates are carrying bombs. There are rules that say that the Kates in particular get to choose between bombs and torpedoes, but they start the game carrying bombs because they were loaded out to bomb Midway Island. They weren't carrying torpedoes to sink ships. So you can't use torpedoes against an island, and you can use bombs against ships, but for the Kates, it would be better for them to carry torpedoes. So here we are attacking Midway Island. The Kates have their bombs, and we need to go ahead and get started in making our attack run. So to determine where the bombers are going to end up coming in on this outer ring as part of their attack, you'll note that there's numbers around the outside. So we're going to roll a die 12 for each one of these groups to see where on the ring they're going to be coming in from. So we'll see if our American player decided to put his aircraft in the right place or not. So first group will be Akagi's group. They rolled an 11. So they're actually going to come in way over here. Looks like they've got a good start. A 9 for the next group. Puts them in here. A 1. And finally, a 7. Now it seems like we have Japanese aircraft attacking from all sides. So far, quite historical. To resolve combat in the zones where there are attacking units and defending units, each side is going to roll dice and compare it to the combat values on your quick reference charts. Let's take a quick look at the Japanese chart. So here we have the Japanese fighter. It has an air attack of 5, so that's what it's going to use against those American Cap fighters. And in the same space, if we look over here, let's just resolve this battle. We'll worry about these other ones some other time. But for the sake of the video, I just want to show you how one works, and we're going to follow that unit all the way through the rings until they make their attack run. So over here, we have some vowels. So those vowels, if we look on here, the dive bombers, against aircraft, they're only a 1. But once they go to drop their bombs on the airfield or whatever, they're going to be using a 6. So as long as they're not going to be dropping their bombs this turn, which they won't because there's no targets out here, the targets are over here, they can go ahead and roll against those fighters as well, but only at a 1. So again, just to recap, we've got a 1 for the vowels, and the zeros are going to be rolling a 5 or less to hit. For the American unit, that's the fighter here, they are also a 5 on anti-air attack. So let's just see how that gets sorted out. So what we have is 2 Japanese fighters here. So we're going to go ahead and roll. Again, we're looking for a 5. and they scored 2 hits, which is exceptional. So there's only one American fighter there, so he's going to be lost, but not before he gets to return fire. So we're going to roll 1 die for him. Now, normally you would go ahead and roll for the 3 vowels in there as well to see if you could roll a 1, but no point in doing so right now. So we'll go ahead and roll for the 1 American fighter, and an 11 is going to be a miss. So no hits on these guys, and these guys are lost. Now that said, we would normally take care of any other combat around, but in this case, these fighters chose this zone, and there's no enemies there, and same here and here. So no other combat to resolve. We're going to move on to the next step. Okay, to begin the second round of battle, the first thing that's going to happen is the attacking units move. Now the attacking units are going to want to keep moving in toward the center. You're not going to want to move around the ring. That's not where they go. You're going to move 1 ring in per the rules. So these units are going to move 1 in. These are going to move 1 in. And these are going to move 1 in. Now they can choose to either join these units or stay out here. In this case, I think these guys are going to move to the center, and these are going to move in here. Why? I don't know, just to show you can do it. Now, the defending units get to move next. He has to choose where he's going to go. Well, he's probably not going to go in here because there's quite a few fighter aircraft there that he would have to defend against. So he's going to go see if he can maybe shoot down one of these units here. Again, he would get the choice because his zone moves to either of these inner adjacent zones. Okay, so at this point we would just repeat the process again from the first round, rolling first for the attacking forces, which are the Japanese aircraft in the zone here, and then we would roll for the 1 defending US unit. Now I'll save us the trouble of that. Let's just say for fun that this unit is shot down as well. So the Americans have lost all of their defending fighters. But let's say he at least got 1 lucky hit in there. Now when we're dealing with aircraft, if you score a hit, the player that controls the units that are hit gets to choose. And that's why you want to have escorting fighters. So in this case, the Japanese player is going to choose to lose 1 of his fighters from that hit that we are assuming happened, instead of taking it on a bomber, because he still wants the bombers around. Remember, units in Midway are finite. You're not buying new units like you are in other games that are similar. So at some point, you may actually want to choose bombers over fighters if you're running low on fighters. Just in contrast to that, though, which we will see here in a moment, is if you're attacking facilities or if there were naval ships involved in this battle, if a bomber is bombing a target, he does get to select what he's bombing. So in most cases, the bombers are going to want to go after capital ships, and the escorting ships are there more or less for AA fire, or if there's surface-to-surface combat, then they get involved. But the game of Midway is all about the aircraft. Alright, so we're going to repeat the process again where the units move in. Now, all of these units only have 1 space left to go. So all of the surviving units are going to move into this center zone to begin their attack runs on the facilities, which we'll see how to resolve. To resolve the last round of combat in this innermost ring, you would normally just go through the same steps as we've described previously. So you're going to resolve any air combat first. So if any defending fighters had survived, they would attack. Also, these anti-aircraft guns, because they're firing at aircraft, would get to attack. There's 6 of them. We'll go ahead and save ourselves the roll there. But normally they would fire against any incoming bombers and fighters first. And then once all that's resolved, all of these bombers get to choose which of these 3 items they're going to bomb. Now, all of the choices have to be made prior to rolling any dice. So you would designate X number per each one, however you like, and then you would roll the results. We'll go ahead and save the rolls of the results, but the way that you would take the casualties on the units is, let's say, for example, the units attacking the AA guns scored 2 hits. Well, those would just be lost like units, so you'd remove 2 chips, and whatever remaining AA guns were left would go back to the Midway Island box on the U.S. Forces carrier card. If the facilities take hits, you would simply use some damage markers. Let's say the airfield takes 3 hits. You could take 3 of the damage markers, put it under the airfield, and then place that back on the carrier card as well. That way you can keep track of the damage to each one of the facilities. Check the rules for what the damage causes. As far as there's reduced capacity at the airfield or the seaplane base, etc. For the AA guns, clearly they would just get fewer shots. Also note that when you're fighting against ships, there's a number of good reminders across the bottom of the battle boards here that indicate certain modifiers in combat based on what your targets are, etc. Once all of this is complete, any bombers that drop their bombs, you're going to remove the ordnance markers from them. And if it weren't the last round of the battle, say if they were dropping bombs on cruisers out here or something, those bombers would move back out here to the holding area so that they would move back to the map at the end. But once a bomber drops their bombs, they're no longer going to participate in combat. So at this point, all of the ordnance markers are going to be removed and the units go back to the map. Once all of the combat is resolved for all of the attacks in the turn, you move on to the 5th phase, which is the air unit maintenance phase. The first thing that's going to happen is any units that are completely out of fuel will perform their return to base movement. What this means is when units run out of fuel, they're no longer able to continue on in any combat or advancing movement in the game, and they have to return to their bases or carriers. So we simply perform that there. We don't have any units that are currently out of fuel. Next is you're going to burn fuel. So what that means is for every unit on the board that has a fuel marker, you're going to have to replace that with the next lowest marker. Or in the cases of units that were involved in combat, like the units here that we've put back on the map from the Midway bombing run, they're going to go directly out of fuel. So to do that, you just replaced the markers that were there with their 1 fuel from the last turn without a fuel markers this turn. Now you'll note that the sequence is important. So you move units that are out of fuel first, and then after that, then you reduce the fuel. After all units have gone through the burn fuel step where you reduce their remaining fuel, the next thing you're going to do is rearm bombers. Rearming bombers takes place in the hangars. In this particular case, I'm showing all of the bombers have ordnance already. But let's say that these torpedo bombers here from the Yorktown had already gone on a bombing run. They had landed back on the carrier and they had moved back to the hangar, and they don't have an ordnance marker. So at this point, if they were in the hangar without ordnance, you would be able to rearm the units by putting a new ordnance marker on those bombers. And that is simply how you perform the rearming the bomber step. After that, you're going to go through the clear the decks step. So again, sequencing is important here. Clearing the decks simply means if you had units, let's say that these bombers again had come back to base on this turn and they landed, so they're up here on the deck, but they don't have any ordnance, they don't have fuel. In this particular case, let's say that they went on a bombing run and they're now out of fuel and they've returned to base, so they need to rearm and refuel. What you would do to perform 5.4 clear the decks is you're going to clear the deck down to the hangar bay. So you would take that fuel marker off, slide these back down, and now they're refueled and can be rearmed the next turn. And then last, you're just going to go through the end turn phase. So in order to go through the end turn, once the 5th phase is done, you're going to start back at the 1st phase again, which is where we start by checking for victory conditions. I certainly hope you found this walkthrough and tutorial useful and helpful in playing your first couple of games. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us at historicalboardgaming.com, and I'd be happy to help anyone out with their game. Thanks again for watching.